Hi everyone, my name's Declan McGlynn. Welcome to Friday Phone Live, Point Blank's weekly broadcast bringing you exclusive tutorials, artist interviews and industry insight every Friday live from East London. Today we're joined by our Ableton tutor Anthony Chapman, who's worked with the likes of Franz Ferdinand, Klaxons and Rudimental. And we're going to find out more about our new Mixing Dance Music with Ableton course. So today we're going to dive deeper into our brand new Mixing Dance Music in Ableton course, which focuses on bridging the production techniques that Ableton is known for with fundamental engineering and mixing skills. The course looks at concepts like dynamics, EQ, and mixing for depth. And if you want to find out more, you can visit online.pointblanklondon.com. And today we're going to be looking at more of a sneak preview into what you can learn on the course. And remember, we are live, so get your questions in and we'll get to them at the end of the tutorial. So Anthony, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure to have you.
Me. Yeah, back in the sauna.
Yes, exactly. We'll try and keep it as cool as possible. So maybe you could start off by just telling us more about the course and the kind of the concept behind it.
Okay, so it's an 8-week course.
It's online.
So it's all done online, and it's really designed to, as you covered briefly there, to bridge that gap between the stuff that you can do in Ableton, because we're all familiar, those of us certainly who use Ableton, and I know a lot of people have kind of dipped their toes in as well. You know, I think it's a software that a lot of people, most people I meet who are making music, electronic music, even if they don't use Ableton all the time, they've used it at some point. And everything really so far, I think, out there has been focused on production, has been focused on making music, on writing, which of course Ableton absolutely excels at. But what's really important is those fundamental technical skills, technical and artistic skills of mixing.
Yeah, the kind of things that don't particularly belong to one genre or DAW.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Techniques.
And I think that I feel like the idea of mix engineers is sort of coming back a little bit. It's getting a little bit more appreciated by people in dance music, you know, in electronic music in general now, not just in rock and pop music. Because for many years, you know, there's big names like Dave Pensado, people like that, who, you know, they're huge sort of stars and they do amazing work. And for a long time, I think people who making electronic music have just sort of mixed as they go along. And that can work, but I usually find that if somebody I'm working with who's making electronic music gives me the multi-track, you know, if they render everything down as audio, give me the multi-track, at the end, if we work on a really, you know, a mix from scratch, usually they're much happier with it, because I often feel it's good to get that separation between the different parts of the process. So, and really, you know, there's some stuff in this course is fundamentals that perhaps in the process of learning Ableton Live you might not pick up because it's so focused on production. But some of it is also very creative stuff, and there's a lot of videos from me. There's also Danny Lewis, I know, who's sat in this chair many times, and you know, we've got our own techniques that we use. There's no rules to mixing. There's rules with some very technical aspects of it to do with level and delivery formats and stuff like that. But you know, it's all about learning more about the process. And to be honest, one of the big things I find is listening, is learning how to listen to music and to audio and understand what's going on in it.
Cool.
So should we take a look at
Let's.
a couple of the aspects that we look at in the course?
Yeah, sure.
So what I'm going to do is I've got a session loaded up in Live, and I'm just going to take a real quick look at 3 different elements that we look at in the course. Just remember that, you know, in the course, it's all done in obviously a lot more detail, but I think we just want to give the audience a bit of a taster today, really, and hopefully you'll learn something from it as well, maybe try something new. So if we head over to the machine here, so you can see, first thing I've got here is I've got this live session, and the first thing you'll notice here is that everything is audio. So everything that I'm working on in the session here is audio. Now, in my videos for the course, that's exactly the same. Everything that I work on, all of the individual tracks are rendered audio, because I really do think that it's a really good habit to get into, to mix your tracks, to basically separate that mixing phase from the production phase. And one of the ways you can ensure that happens is when you say, right, I've finished this track, render all of the individual tracks as audio, like without plugins, you know, without EQ, compression, stuff like that. You might use effects that are like fundamental to the sound, but standard mixing type effects, really you want to leave all of those off. So you've just got this. The other reason I like to do this is archivally, this is a really good thing, because if you want to come back to a track in 10, 15 years time, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to open it up in whatever version of Live or whatever DAW you're using. You might not have the instruments, you might not have the plugins. So this is like, to me, as an old school guy to some extent, this is like the master tape. This is like, you know, this is my master tape. I can always go back to the shelf and pull this off and remix it. So the first thing I want to take a look at here is something to do with delay. Now, we're all, I would imagine, quite familiar with the kind of delay devices we have access to in Live, the classic one being the simple delay here. And this is the simple delay, but it's absolutely fantastic. It's a great tool, you can do a lot with it. Obviously, the other thing with Live is the rack system gives you so much flexibility to work with these effects. So what I wanted to do was create a multi-tap delay. And a multi-tap delay is essentially multiple delays all running together at the same time, at different delay times. And if we sync these to the beat of the track, we can really do something interesting and rhythmic. So what I did was I made a rack of my own here. So if I just drop this in here, I'll take out the original simple delay. And this rack, all it is consisting of, if we take a look, so effectively we're going to take a look under the hood and see what we've done. This is something I use in the course, but it's something that anybody using Live could build, because all it does is it just uses system devices. So I've got 4 chains here. So each one of these chains can operate in parallel. Any audio that comes through, if those chains are turned on, if these little speakers here are switched on, the audio is going to pass through that and we're going to hear that coming out of the channel. And all I've done for each one is put in a simple delay, and each of the simple delays is set to a different time. So we've got that one set to 3/16, the second one is set to 5, the third one's set to 8, and the fourth one's set to 6. Now, what I'm going to do is just go through here and turn off this filter, because before we look at what the filter's doing, I just want us to hear exactly what's happening. Now let me just grab this, and what I'm going to do is drop this onto this track here. So what I'm going to do is just play a quick blast so we can hear the decay of it, so we can try and hear what's happening. So you see there's a bunch of different delays going on there. If I just leave the first one turned on, so that's our one that's on 3/16. This is the classic delay, starting point delay time that we use all the time. Dick, 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 that sort of, you know, that rolling. But then if I bring in the second one, if we just listen to the second one, so this is the one that's set to 5/16. Okay, and as we go through, each one of those is different. So that 8/16, that's like on the halves. And then if we go to the last one here, this is the one that's on 6. So this is kind of double the 3 that we had on the first one. Now, that's fine, and that's working quite nicely, but the problem I always get, and this isn't just with multi-tap delays, this is with delays in general, is when the signal coming out of the delay sounds exactly the same as the signal feeding it, we just end up totally confused. We end up with this kind of big mess. So what I really, really like to do is alter the sound of the signal coming from the delay. And I actually personally usually favour shaping that sound on its way into the delay. So the delay gets fed something that sounds different from the original signal. So if I turn on these filters, so on each of these chains I've put an auto filter, and I've set that to this bandpass shape. So what I'm doing is on each one of them, you see the frequency is different on each one. And I'm just trying to sort of focus on different areas of the frequency. Like that. So if I just listen to the first one, okay, and this effectively is just, all this is doing is just restricting the frequencies. If I take this and I drop this rack onto the delay return, what I can do is turn up send B. And then what we're going to start getting is a mixture between the original signal and the delayed signal. And if I turn on all of the chains, you see the textures start to get really interesting. But probably the best way to really hear easily what this does is if I've got this, there's a loop here at the start of the track, which is just like this little percussive sound. Let's take the solo off. If we go here. So yeah, there's just this one sound here. And if I turn this up in the multi-tap delay, so all that, the original sound is just going donk, donk on the beats. But once we send it into the multi-tap delay, we get this really sophisticated polyrhythmic sound. If I take out that multi-tap delay, it's like, you know, it's creating a huge amount of texture. So, you know, this kind of thing is something that's in the course we really focus in on and really harnessing the effect. I would say it's fairly evenly split between techniques and techniques and devices and sounds that are more practical, and then some that are very creative as well. We're trying to bring the two together, and I think that's really important because I think people that are drawn to Ableton tend to be very interested in the creative side of things. So I think it's very important to have the two together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that mixing device would be awesome. I mean, in that case, it's quite prominent and it's like a sound effect in its own right. But it's used subtly, it can be quite good on vocals.
Absolutely.
To like create depth.
Absolutely.
Very quickly.
And that kind of, it's weird how these things go in cycles. That wet sound I find is very in vogue at the moment. Whereas if you went back 2 years ago, stuff was very dry, even in dance music as well. Things were looking very dry. Then reverb started to creep up. It's amazing how you see the fashions for different elements of sound sort of come and go in this kind of cyclic way. And that kind of wet sound, I think a kind of a psychedelic sound in a lot of music, a lot of electronic music is very, very popular at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I guess because the music's getting, the kind of deep house sound is much more minimal, so it needs more to fill it out.
Yeah, there's loads of space in it, you know, but it's just because something's minimal doesn't mean it has to be dry. So, you know, there's, and something like this, you wouldn't necessarily run it the whole way through the track, but you might have a section of the track where you just gradually start to like push it up, and then it will gradually build up and build up and build up. When I use effects like this, to be honest, I usually end up printing them as audio. Because then once I've printed it as audio, I can then manipulate it even further if I want. And this is this weird sort of grey area where we're in the mix, and I'm always saying, oh, you should always do the mix down as a totally separate process. But then I start printing effects as audio and I start chopping them up, and I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, I'm producing again.
Yeah.
So, you know, so there's always that like weird grey area, but it can be really, really useful. So, shall I move on to?
Yes.
Yeah, to something else?
Gain automation. I mean, maybe we want to introduce it like in terms of automation.
Yeah, so I'd say this is not as sexy as the multi-tap delay, but it's a real fundamental thing that I think is really important, and I think a lot of people struggle with this. I did initially when I first, many years ago when I first started mixing in the box. So obviously automation is a huge part of live. It's very, very fundamental to the way it works, and automation really originates from mixing. You know, we've all probably seen film of those big old mixing desks with the flying faders that you know they do the Mexican wave on the faders, or Vegas mode. Some of the big control services you get nowadays over the test. You go into the test menu and there's Vegas mode, and it's basically every light flashing and every fader moving like all at the same time. And so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about automation in the mix, and what I want to focus in on is automating volume. So automating the volume of the track, okay? So if we take a look here, if we, let's just have a look at a sound. Let's take a look at one of our other sort of musical sounds like this one here towards the end, okay? And so if I turn this up, so this is a strings synth. If we have a listen to this, so this is like a kind of 70s style. This actually comes from F Expansion Decam Synth Squad. It's, is it Amber? I think it's Amber, yeah, the one that's the string, yeah. I know they're friends of Point Blank, and yeah, I absolutely love it. I love those old 70s Roland like string synths, Solinas, yeah, they're beautiful sounds, really good. And whenever I use them in tracks, people always home in on them. Like, you know, oh, that sounds amazing. There's just something about it because it doesn't quite sound like a synth and it doesn't quite sound like something real. It's a real nice sound. So what I want to look at is the fact that if we listen to our track here at the start, there's much less going on when that sound comes in. But if we go here, this is towards the end of the track, and the beat's like, you know, fully going. But it seems to me, it seems to poke out a little bit, okay? So now, what obviously we could do, and probably what we would think of doing first would be to automate the track volume. So we've got the track volume parameter visible there, and I can always drop that down to a separate lane. This is something that I love about the way automation's handled in live. It's really easy to do that, and that means we can work on this automation lane totally separately from everything else. So what I could do is go, well, I'll grab that lane there, and I'll just pull that down. So that's just going to make that sound quieter there. Let's make that, just make that a little bigger. So you can see the red line there is showing us how we've made the volume quieter there. Now that's great. That's great. But then let's just say I bring in a bunch of other elements in my mix. So I've got all these other sounds that have still got to come in. And then I decide, oh, hang on a minute. This is actually now, the level's not quite right. I want to change the level. So I reach for my fader, and then I turn the fader up. And then what happens is the automation's disabled and our automation re-enable light comes on. Okay, so you can see, remember this is introduced in Live 9. This is basically telling us that whenever we interrupt the automation, that lights up to tell us that we've done that, and the automation will not, on that track, will not carry on until we hit that button, and then it goes red again.
But it goes back to the level it was originally set at.
Exactly. So essentially what's happened is we've lost control of the fader. It's a bit more subtle than that in live. The way it is in live is we've lost control of the fader, but we can get control of the fader, but we've lost the automation. On most DAWs, it would be, you would grab that, like on Logic or Pro Tools or Cubase. If you've got automation, you would grab the fader and then let go, and it would just go whoop, back to where it was. So effectively here, what we're doing is we're losing control of the fader. Now, the easiest way to get around this, I find, is to use the utility plugin. They don't call it the utility plugin for nothing. So, you know, like I use it all the time for so many different things. And what you can actually do here is, if I click on the gain parameter for the utility plugin, and so remember, whenever you click on any parameter in a device or a plugin, that will come up in the main lane here. So if you want to add a separate lane, you just click on the parameter, go up here and then click plus. So now I've got my utility gain here. And what I'm going to do is, well, there's a couple of different ways I could do this. I could copy and paste my automation from the volume that I did, and then I could just delete that from my track. And then what's happening there is when the playhead gets to here, it's changing the gain on the utility plugin, which is changing the volume of the track, of the audio coming out of the track. One thing you have to remember, though, let's just grab an audio effects rack just to demonstrate something. The one thing you've got to remember though is if you're doing this kind of automation and you've got any other effects in the chain, this needs to be at the end, Because if it's before it, it's just going to change the amount of level going into the effects.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily going to give you the result that you want. So you must remember to put that utility plugin at the end of the chain. But doing that copy and paste, that can work sometimes, but obviously we're not necessarily starting from the same position as we had the volume at on the track. So rather than doing that, I'm just going to delete that, and I'm just going to manually go in and just do a little duck there. And then if we play here, if you watch this here, the utility gain, you see it goes down. So that's how I'm doing my volume automation. That's how I always do my volume automation these days. To be honest, not just in Live, in Logic and in Pro Tools as well.
Yeah,
I do the same thing. I don't automate the faders anymore because I want to be able to, at the end of the day, go, oh, you know what? The automation's fine, but the overall level of that track just needs to change a little bit. Yeah. So this, I would really, really advise, get into that habit of using the utility plugin. And the other thing is as well, is if you draw curves, or if you've got a controller, like I know we've got the Impulse and the MPK here, you can just map one of the faders or one of the knobs on the controller, and then you effectively do it as if you were doing manual fader rides. Just do it on the utility plugin gain. But you can still go into the mixer and do an overall change on the level, which I think is really, really important.
0 dB on the gain, on the utility, is only ever in context of the fader.
Well, 0 dB means it will just make no change. So that, wow, it's thunder.
That's not like I was thinking, is that an awesome bass sound in this track? It's like, no.
So 0 dB on the utility plugin is just means it will make no change. And remember, if it's coming at the end of the chain, so whatever it does interact with the fader, because I'm trying to remember off the top of my head the exact signal flow. Pretty sure the fader is right at the end, so the utility plugin is going to make changes before the fader, but it's got to be at the end of the effects chain, at the end of the device chain. Okay, I have sometimes made racks that include a utility at the end, just so I can like bring a bunch of different settings in at once, and then I've still got that control over the utility gain.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
So, third and final point.
Yeah.
A nice little trick.
Yeah, so this is a bit naughty, this one. But I do like to show people this. It's something that, I didn't think of this. A lot of people do it. I was shown it by somebody.
I know JC, our head of school, talks about doing it on the old SSLs.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's not a new thing.
Exactly, because on the SSL you had the tone generator, so you could just hit the button and it would start generating a tone. You could record it down. But what I want to do is just use a free plugin, which I do use in the course as well, just to add a little bit of bass enhancement.
Okay.
So
good.
yeah. So if I go into my plugins here, and I've got this section here of MDA plugins. Now, these MDA plugins are free. They've been around for years. In fact, I've got a feeling these audio units haven't been updated since like 2006 or something like that. But there are other plugins that you can get which will do the same thing. If you've got Max for Live, or if you've got Suite, which means you've got Max for Live, Suite 9, you can download, there's a couple of different test tone devices which you can download from the Max for Live site. But I just like using this one because it's very simple. So what I'm going to do is go up to my drums here, and if I listen to this kick drum, so this is a nice snappy kick drum, but it is missing a little something at the bottom end. I mean, the stuff there, I've not really EQ'd this yet, but I'm thinking I could do with a little bit more here. So what I'll do is create a new audio track, and I'm going to call this kick sub. And if I go to my test tone plugin here, and I drop that into my track, now if I solo, we can hear straight, I'll turn that down a bit. So by default, this is just generating a sine wave. And hang on a minute, let's bring that back. And at the moment it's generating at about I've actually turned it down a tiny bit, but it's just under 1 kilohertz. But what we're going to need is something a lot lower than that. Now, what I would probably do is spend a bit of time figuring out what a complementary frequency would be for this. I don't always tune the bass drum or the real low stuff to the track. it's a case by case basis for me.
So there are, what you mean by complementary frequency is a frequency that's the fundamental frequency of the key of the track.
Either that or just something that sounds good.
Yeah.
Because once you put stuff in the mix, you may find that you get slightly weird illusions going on, and on paper you'll listen to something and think, well, that's totally out of key, but then when you put it in the mix, it kind of works because there's all this dynamics processing going on in the mix. So it really is a case. People like me who say this, it annoys people so much. I know it annoys students, but it's so true. You got to use your ears. That's what they're for. There's too many of us nowadays. I think with DAWs, we mix with our eyes. I always encourage students when I'm teaching the online Ableton courses to don't rely on the spectrum analyzer. Don't rely on the EQ. I think JC's used it in one of these sessions, the Lufticus EQ, the free EQ, where there's no graphic representation of the EQ curve. It's so good. It sounds brilliant, but also it's a really good habit to get into. Listening, changing the EQ and using your ears, not looking at a curve to tell what the EQ is doing. Yeah. For the sake of time, I'm just going to set this to about 50 hertz. Okay, so hopefully you can hear there. If you're listening on headphones, you might need to turn up a little bit, but you've got that real low tone there.
YouTube might destroy that.
Yeah, it might do, yeah.
We'll
so
see.
we can see the level there, it is there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab another device. I'm going to grab my gate. And the gate is something that we don't necessarily use that often in dance music in this sort of way. I always think of the gate as really being mainly a tool for live sound, for live music. The first time I ever used a gate was when I was doing sounds for for bands at a place that I used to work when I was a teenager. And this was so you could sort of tidy up the kick drum and the snare drum so it wasn't getting spill from other stuff on the stage, from guitars and stuff like that. But there are situations where we can use it like this. And the first thing I'm going to do is the floor value here, I'm going to turn that all the way down because that's basically the amount of reduction it's going to put on the sound when the gate is closed. Because the gate is essentially, it just decides whether or not we hear audio. It's literally a gate that will open and close to let audio through or stop it. And so I've set the floor to all the way down to -infinity, so it's silence when it's closed. Then I'm going to open this up here and I'm going to turn on the side chain. And I'm going to take the sidechain signal from that first kick drum and I'm going to make it pre-effects. I just like to always get in the habit of doing that. When I'm using the sidechain, almost always I'll be taking it pre-effects. So now if I play this, you can see in the activity window here, we can see the audio from the kick drum coming through. And if I pull down this threshold, eventually we start to get the sub bass coming through rhythmically. Now, this is just the default settings of the attack and release, the attack, the hold and release. So often what I would end up doing in this kind of situation, if we just solo the tone here, what I would end up doing is just turning up the attack a little bit because we don't really need the transient from this. We just need that tail, we need that subby tail. And then I might work a little bit on the release, just turn that up a bit. Really, it depends on the tempo of the track. Now, so if you listen to those both together, we've now got a separate track of sub bass, which we can mix in with everything else. So if we
one of the real advantages of that as well is that when you bring in, a lot of people layer stuff and they have a sub and made in a click, and they put them together as a kick. You don't get phase issues this way.
Exactly.
So you don't have to line up the audio perfectly.
Exactly.
You just change the attack and release.
Yeah.
Done.
I think, definitely. I would definitely look at when you're doing stuff like this, make that attack a little bit slower so that the very beginning of the tone when the gate opens isn't interfering with the clicky part of the kick. Yeah. I mean, the other thing is with DAWs as well, very often I've got a feeling in live that if with the attack at minimum, it might click. You have a listen. Yeah. So you can just hear it starting to click. So I would just push it away from the transient by about 10 milliseconds, something like that. Whatever works really. The other thing as well is you might want to, when you're at the actual mix stages, you might want to turn the look ahead up to 10 milliseconds. So this effectively just means that it's the DAW is going to go ahead 10 milliseconds and see what's coming up, which means it can react quicker. With that minimum attack when you get the click, if you have the look ahead at 10 milliseconds, often you'll find you get less of that because it prepares itself for what's going on. But be aware it adds 10 milliseconds of latency. So, you know, if you're still doing anything involving playing instruments or whatever, that's going to add 10 milliseconds of latency, which is quite a lot when you're playing.
And is that latency compensated for by live?
It's compensated for in the mix, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
I mean, when you're playing a mix down, if you change the look head, you will hear everything just go, just like reposition itself slightly. So, yeah, live does take care of that. There's certain areas of live where you might find you get phasing problems to do with latency. Sometimes in the racks, if you're using multiple chains with some third-party effects. But in terms of general mixing, it seems to be fine to me. I've not really found any problems with it. So
nice one. So we're out of time for this section. And of course, if you do want to learn more about that, you can find out all about it on the course. Let's just jump to YouTube for some questions.
Great, fantastic.
If you do have any more questions, now's the time to get them in. We've got Zero Let Down Zero, who says, would Anthony feel confident using only native tools/effects found in Ableton 9 before the mix is sent to the mastering engineer?
I think so. I mean, I would qualify that by saying factory devices plus maybe a handful of free plugins. Like this one, like Lufticus, which is mind-blowingly good, like Flux Bittersweet. I was just reading yesterday that somebody's made a distressor emulation, which apparently all they ask for is $1 donation. So you know, there's a lot of stuff out there. And that not wishing to sort of buzz market the YouTube channel, but the videos that I've got the two up so far, the mixed deconstruction of the Debucas track that I did, that I mixed for the videos. Everything I did in that was with factory plugins and just a handful of free plugins. So yeah, I would. In reality, what I usually end up using, there are certain tools that I always use. There's a couple of isotope things that I always use, and a couple of waves things, you know, and quite a lot of. I'm quite a fan of the T-Rax modules, so the individual modules of T-Rax. Yeah, the IK Multimedia stuff. They're really, you know, I think they're very underrated, and I really like those a lot. But I still, when I'm mixing live, I absolutely use lots of factory devices, no question. So
nice one. So we also have another one from Zero Let Down Zero, very getting greedy. Instruments, at which frequency should instruments be converted to mono, and which should be left stereo?
Okay, this is a really good question. So for me personally, I tend to go around 90 to 100 hertz. So that's one of the other things I do in the course is we look a little bit at MS mid-side, and what I've done in the course is I've created a little rack which you can download, but again, it's another free plugin. It's Voxengo MSED, which is like a little free mid-side decoder. For anyone who's not aware, I'm not going to go into the full explanation, but mid-side as opposed to left and right. Mid is everything that's equal in both channels. The side is everything that's unequal. And mid-side EQ means EQing the mids and the sides separately. And when you're doing that, a lot of the time, monoing certain frequencies is really going to help. So if you can basically go in on the sides and just sweep out everything up to like about 90 to 100 hertz, that's something I would do a lot. But I use some of the Brainworks plugins as well, and they let you do that. There's the mono maker on that, but you just turn it up. And yeah, those anything below 100 hertz, for me, you don't want that in stereo. You don't want anything to be happening in stereo there. And the easiest way to kind of learn why is if you start looking at multi-track drums, like actual live drums, those low frequencies are the first ones that have problems with phase. So really you want to take them out of the equation entirely, just make them mono. Make them very focused on where they're coming from. So yeah.
Cool. So we got two more. Commit asks, when and why would you use a multiband compressor? Okay.
A multiband compressor for me is a rare thing that I would use in the mix. I use multiband dynamics processing in mastering, but very, very subtly, like very, very small. I know quite a few mastering engineers who don't do multiband at all in mastering. I'm not a mastering engineer. I just do a bit of mastering. So, but yeah. So I use it in that. But sometimes I would use it in the mix where, for example, if I've got a loop where there's one element of the loop, say a hi-hat or something like that, which is very, very prominent compared to everything else. And rather than trying to compress the whole thing, I might just use a multiband compressor. Obviously in Live, we've got the multiband dynamics module. I'm not a huge fan of it, I've got to say, because I think the interface is weird. I think if they change the interface around, it sounds absolutely fine. I just think the interface is really weird. But I've used that before with a loop where it's got a big honking sort of hi-hat through it. And then I've just found that frequency and then just got the multiband dynamics to just push that frequency down.
Right.
So, you know, it really, I would say, try not to use it as a regular thing in the mix, because all of that flattening of the frequencies, I think, can make stuff sound a little bit dead. So, but I would use it as a tool, like that you pull out in sort of emergency situations.
It's kind of like dynamic EQ in that way.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which is why I like using it in mastering. That's how I kind of like what it can do on a master. So. Yeah,
nice one. So one more question, then we're going to have to wrap up. Kustrim Brasia has asked, do you ever use New York compression on bass?
Yeah,
so New York compression in general,
so New York compression or parallel compression. I mean, obviously, Live is the king of parallel processing because it's built into every channel. You know, with the audio effects rack, you can do parallel processing of absolutely any effects. But yes, I do. Yeah, I would use that on bass quite a lot, just to try and, you know. Effectively, whenever I do parallel compression or parallel limiting, it's just trying to have my cake and eat it. Because I love the sound. You know, we all know the first time we ever use a compressor. I mean, for me, it was hardware compressors in the studio, going, oh my God, that sounds amazing. So all my mixes were just over compressed on every channel. But parallel compression really does let you have your cake and eat it. You can get big compressed sound and then balance that with the dry sound, and you really can get the best of both worlds. So yeah, I would use that on bass. I'd use it on a lot of other stuff, drum buses as well, because I tend to sort of submix all of my drums, and then I'll do a bit of parallel compression. Using the glue, the new compressor in Live that they introduced for Live 9.
The dry wet control.
Exactly, it's brilliant. It's really good. That just seems to particularly suit it. If you set that to super fast, really, you know, basically do much more compression than you'd ever normally do, and then parallel it a bit. Yeah, that's definitely something I would do, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, we are out of time. Hopefully you got inspired from that for the weekend. And of course, if you want to learn more about that and get your hands on some exclusive Live devices and projects and a whole lot more techniques, you can find out more about our Mixing Dance Music in Ableton course at online.pointblanklondon.com. We'll be back next Friday for another Friday Forum Live, so we'll see you then. Cheers.
Thank you.